Kari Zaga. I create Procreate brushes, and today I'd like to introduce you to my paper and canvas set. So let's check what's inside. The set contains 120 brushes, based on high-resolution images of real papers and canvases. I also included 4 realistic torn paper brushes, which are a regular part of my other brush set, and here I added them as a bonus. Besides, the set contains stamps with tips on how to use the brushes. Additionally, the entire set comes in 2 variants, Flexi and Fixed. I'll explain the difference between these two later in this video. I described the first 30 brushes in the set as overlay. They are perfect if you want to add a paper or canvas texture to your artwork. Basically, these brushes are quite transparent, with well-defined shadows and highlights, and can be used to add texture without introducing a new color to the image. What does it mean? Let's choose another brush with a similar texture, which is non-overlay, and you can see the difference. One tip: if you want the texture to be stronger, use a darker brush color. The overlay brushes cover a wide range of textures, and here are just a few examples. Close-ups of all the brushes from this set you can see in a separate demo video. The next 15 brushes are watercolor papers, and I think they are really beautiful. These brushes are slightly more opaque than the overlay brushes, so you can see more of the color of the brush itself. Then there are 10 brushes that I described as tinted. These brushes are thicker, darker, and less transparent. Therefore, they are best suited for painting backgrounds or plain elements. You will also find old papers here that will give your illustrations an interesting aged effect. They are also quite opaque. And beautiful, rich textures of handmade papers. They are great if you want to give your designs an organic look. Then there are some crumpled and creased papers, and a number of cardboards with really nice, thick textures. The last group of papers is quite diverse, and I gave it the collective name craft papers. Here you will find a variety of brushes that do not fit into the previous categories. I think one of the coolest brushes here is this metallic one. And finally, at the end of the list, you will find 15 beautiful canvas textures. Additionally, the set includes 4 torn paper brushes. I'll explain how to use them in the last part of this video. As I mentioned at the beginning, the entire set comes in 2 versions, Fixed and Flexi. And here's the difference. With the Flexi brushes, the texture is flexible and follows the size of the brush. If I set the brush to a smaller size, the texture will be finer. And if I increase the brush size, the detail will also increase. This is very convenient because you can always adjust the texture on the go. With the fixed brushes, the texture scale remains constant. No matter if I set the brush to a smaller or larger size, the texture always looks the same. But of course, you can also adjust the texture here. To do this, click on the brush to open Brush Studio, select Grain, and in the center panel, move the scale slider to adjust the grain size to your liking. You can follow the changes live in the preview panel on the right. As you can see, the texture is now finer, even though the brush size is still the same. Let's try yet to increase the grain scale. You can always restore your brush to its original settings afterward. In the Brush Studio, click on About this brush. Then press the Reset Brush button. That's one difference between fixed and flexi, and the other is texture alignment. In the fixed variant, if you apply multiple brush strokes in the same place, the texture will remain clear. While in the flexi variant, each time you make a new stroke, the texture will be placed differently, and as a result, it will be getting more and more blurred. Now I'll give you some tips on how to use the brushes. Let's start by making simple digital paper as a base for painting. You will need 2 layers. The top one will be for texture, and the bottom one for painting. On the top layer, tap the N symbol and change the blend mode from normal to linear burn. Then select one of the overlay brushes and paint texture on the top layer. Go to the bottom layer and that's it. Now you can choose your favorite brush and just paint whatever you want. You get the feeling as if you're painting on real paper. You can create more painting layers. It's just important that the texture layer is on the very top. You can also add more texture layers and switch between them. If you make 2 layers visible, you can even get a new texture. Let's add yet paper texture to this illustration. First, create a new layer on top of the illustration, and if the image is isolated, enable the clipping mask. The clipping mask will limit the texture to only the illustration on the layer below and will exclude the background. Next, choose a paper brush and paint over the illustration. Don't forget to change the blend mode of the texture layer to linear burn. This will make the texture clearly visible in all areas of the image. To add more contrast, you can duplicate the texture layer 1 or more times. The more copies you make, the stronger the texture will be. Instead of using linear burn, you can use multiply blend mode. In some cases, this will be a better choice. Let's try both blend modes side by side. Basically, linear burn is the best choice for overlay brushes because the texture is more contrasting and colors are more vivid than with multiply blend mode. The difference is really subtle, but I hope you can see it. However, with other brushes, especially less transparent ones, the linear burn effect may be too strong, and the resulting colors too saturated. So in such cases, the multiply blend mode may be a better choice. It will simply create a more natural look. And here's one more method. Let's choose a nice brush and select white. Then paint the texture over the image. Note that the blend mode is normal. I think the effect is already quite cool. But to make it even more interesting, let's change the blend mode to overlay and then duplicate this layer. we get a nice aged effect on the image. All brushes in this set have more or less transparency built in, so the layer underneath the texture will always show through it. But what if you wanted an opaque paper with a rich, intense color? This is very easy to do. Fill the empty layer with your favorite color. Then create a new layer on top of it, change the blend mode to linear burn, and paint with a texture brush. Then merge both layers into one, and that's it. You've created a nice colored sheet of paper that is no longer transparent. You can add a new layer on top and use it for drawing.
Here are some other tips. The brushes always keep the same orientation towards the top of the screen. So if you want to change texture orientation on the Procreate canvas, simply rotate the canvas before you start painting. Depending on how much you rotate the canvas, the texture will be more or less tilted. An important feature of my brushes is the maximum size to which you can set a given brush. If I set the brush to maximum, it will cover quite a large part of the canvas, and I can quickly paint the entire area. This is a very convenient feature that is sometimes missing in other brushes. By the way, if you want a good resolution image, make sure your Procreate canvas is large enough. I mean the dimensions of the canvas in pixels, and not the resolution in DPI. To show you what I mean, let's add a paper texture to this illustration. The current canvas is quite large, and as you can see, the texture looks nice. Then I will reduce the size of the canvas 10 times and paint again. And look how poor the image quality is now. Here is another example. I will now duplicate the original image and shrink the copy. If I stretch this small copy back to its initial size, we can again observe a loss of quality compared to the original. So remember, always start with the size of canvas you want at the end, or even larger. You can always make it smaller without losing quality, but if you start too small, you won't be able to enlarge the image later without losing resolution.
So much for paper and canvas brushes, and here are the torn paper brushes. Let's take the first one and see how it works. First, paint a shape using white color. And duplicate this shape. Go to the bottom copy and tap Invert to change the color to black. Then add some Gaussian blur to it. Create a new layer on top. Activate the clipping mask and apply the paper brush. In the end, you can group all 3 layers to make it easier to manipulate them together. Now let's add a rough edge to this illustration. This time, pick brush number 4. Create a new layer, select white, and draw a border around the image. Paint also the area inside the border. Then move the white shape below the illustration and activate the clipping mask on the illustration layer. You can use the transform tool and stretch the image, as well as the white shape, so that the 2 layers fit nicely together. Yet a shadow, like before. Duplicate the white layer. Invert the bottom copy to black and add some Gaussian blur. Let's merge the illustration with the layer below and slightly modify the shape to get a folded corner. We can also add texture. Since this is a fixed brush variant, we can apply several brush strokes one over another to create color variation while the texture remains sharp. This was one way to use torn paper brushes, and here's another. Fill the empty layer with white and select brush number 2, but this time it should be the eraser tool. Next, paint a hole in the white layer. The remaining steps will be similar as before. Duplicate the white shape, change the color of the bottom copy to black, and add a Gaussian blur to create a shadow. Finally, add the paper texture on top.
That's all for today. The link to the brush set you can find in the description. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel for more. Thanks for watching, and see you again.